Because they are iron women. Because they earned their places in Parliament by beating all other candidates for Parliament on their very own merit and were unhelped by anyone else. That is why we respect them, and that is what we want to see in status quo. With Western liberal democracies, we're talking about places that have a strong concept of rights and women's rights. We're looking at countries like USA and UK. And these countries often need third-wave feminism rather than second-wave feminism. Third-wave feminism focuses on social justice and changing the principles on which society is built. So it focuses on perceptions of gender and gender relationships rather than pure rights, such as whether women get to drive. Now, affirmative action is policies that install women in places because they are women rather than on the basis of merit. We're talking about quotas in education, such as university places. We're talking about quotas in Parliament, which are talking, for example, how many women we can have in the House of Lords in the UK. By the feminist movement, we're talking about a movement that is not necessarily organized, because there's a spectrum of prominent groups and a spectrum of prominent women activists and male activists even. Now, our burden is to prove that what is best for the feminist movement is to oppose affirmative action. That means the metric of this debate is what is best for the feminist movement rather than for any other kinds of distinctions. While they have to prove that opposing affirmative action will harm systemically the feminist movement. Now, our stance is that prominent feminists should come up in opposition of affirmative action. And these prominent feminists and prominent groups should openly campaign against affirmative action amongst the other causes that they already campaign for. As a team, we'll be forwarding 3 lines of argument to you. We're going to tell you how the feminist movement should act in accordance with its aims of, firstly, equity, secondly, breaking down barriers, and thirdly, on the aims of progress. Now, the premise of this argument is that the feminist movement, what is best for the feminist movement, is to act in accordance with its aims. Now, the aims of the feminist movement, the first thing, is to achieve equity rather than pure equality. Now, social equity is the buzzword of third-wave feminism. If we look at examples like Femin, with bra burning and all its other campaigns, there is no practical outcome to those campaigns but changing perceptions of men and women on the ground of what is acceptable and socially acceptable in society. We're looking at, for example, campaigns for women to go topless, because now the campaigns in Western liberal democracies are no longer about fundamental rights, because women already have those fundamental rights. Rather, it's about the perceptions to which we give those women that right. Now, this means that third-wave feminism is about a struggle of perceptions, winning over hearts and minds, rather than pure outcomes. That is why equity, which is equality of opportunity, means so much more than equality of outcome, because it is a process of equity through which we put these women in Parliament, through which we put these women in the workplace, that really makes for an equal society that women really want to live in. And that is why the feminist movement, in line with its aims of equity, must not sanction things like affirmative action. For example, equity is allowing women to be presidents on the basis of meritocracy, while equality means forcing half of the world's presidents to be women and the other half to be men. We think equality of outcome is something that is manifestly unfair. Now, affirmative action systemically works against equality of opportunity by skewering the process of selection. For example, with political quotas, there's a guarantee, ladies and gentlemen, of a percentage of women in Parliament, which means that women systemically have to perform at half the level of men just so that they can get into Parliament. Now, this is systemic because affirmative action is always about this, about giving women a leg up in places where there aren't currently enough women, simply because of the very arbitrary construct of gender. So that is why we think it entrenches existing perceptions of gender rather than breaking them down, as we actually want the feminist movement to be doing. Hence, this is ultimately against the aims of the feminist movement, because even if women get into Parliament or get into very high positions in the workplace, the process was wrong and illegitimate. Second argument, on the aims of the feminist movement and how it is to break down barriers between men and women. And what we're going to tell you is how affirmative action worsens barriers between men and women rather than breaking them down. Affirmative action does this because it builds the perception across all parts of society that women are inferior, that they need a higher political force to put them into the places that they are in, just because they can't get there on their own merit. This is insidious because in Western liberal democracies, women already have rights. This makes people question what is fundamentally wrong about women that they need that leg up. Yes, sir?
How about the affirmative action taken on behalf of the black population of America? Does that make it look weak?
We think that the situation of the black people in America is something manifestly different because they were facing rights, a lack of rights in the political sphere. But we tell you this is very different than women because we characterize right from the start that in Western liberal democracies, women are allowed to do many things, like sit on buses that black people weren't able to do back then. So the situation of progress is very, very different. Now, affirmative action worsens existing perceptions of female dependence. We look, for example, at Angela Merkel, who is dubbed as her Merkel's little girl because her political opponents use this as fuel for political mudslinging. Because they tell her that she rose to power in the shadow rather than on her own merit. Imagine how much worse it would be if she only got in on the basis of affirmative action. She would not only be her Merkel's little girl, but the little girl of the German parliament. We don't think this is right when Angela Merkel has done a great job as a Chancellor of Germany. Furthermore, affirmative action worsens political mudslinging because it sends that message to women in society that they're just not good enough. When we see what happens on the public and political sphere, it tends to transcend that and go out into society as well. Because when women see that their political idols are being mudslung, are being taught to like little girls, that sends a message to them that they are just not good enough. Furthermore, in the workplace, affirmative action makes men see women as enemies. Because men feel displaced by quotas that judge based on the arbitrary notion of gender, which means men never got a chance to get that job simply because a woman had to be taken in to fill up that quota. So we tell you that creates backlash and that creates reverse discrimination from men against women. Last tier of analysis, how this worsens organic change because the feminist movement starts to focus more on affirmative action than existing organic change that is already driven by women. In 50 years, female representation in parliament globally has gone from 1.1 to 2% to 20%. This means that there's a dramatic rise and that women are working up on the basis of their own merit. This means there's no need for an affirmative action policy at all. We secondly give you the example of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, which has improved tenfold in 10 years, which means that women are making advances on their own and affirmative action just insults them. And affirmative action, therefore, changes the perceptions on the ground and regresses the growth of the feminist movement rather than improving it. And if it harms the perceptions of women, then the feminist movement simply cannot accept that. Because all it does is create more barriers between men and women and the perception that women just aren't good enough. And we tell you this is especially insidious because it's not something as physical and concrete as women not having rights, as women not being able to sit on buses, as women not being able to drive. It's something more fundamentally wrong about women. That is why we have to put them in quotas in education, have to put them in quotas in the workplace, simply because as if they can't defend themselves. That is why we defend ground-up change. For example, campaigns that call for acknowledging and respecting a woman's ability, instead of using quotas and policies that bring about an artificial outcome. Go with the side that really protects women and feminism.
Thank you very much to talks this morning. We'd like to now talk about the opportunity
Women are beautiful, women are caring, and women are capable. But that quality often is overshadowed by their maternal instincts, and that is wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to make sure that women are just as appreciated in society as their male counterparts. And this is why we are proud to oppose the motion that this House believes that feminist movement should oppose affirmative action for women in Western liberal democracies. Well, let's start off by going through some of the things that just came inside proposition. First of all, we have a serious issue with the way that they would do this, with the way that they define affirmative action. They define affirmative action primarily as something that had to do with female quotas in, for example, Parliament or these things. Well, we say that affirmative action is something that has to do with the more general term, something that, simply means that we should compensate for some disadvantages that certain groups in society have been faced with. For example, women, we mentioned black rights movement. We don't think that we need more black people in Parliament. That doesn't mean that we need to give them affirmative action. Thank you. And on their first point, they said that the process should be equal. They said something about, we need to have the process of women going into these things, for example, Parliament and colleges and jobs and that kind of thing, more equal. But that it should be like an organic thing, and it should be just because that we respect Hillary and we respect Margaret Thatcher. Thank you. Well, we respect Margaret Thatcher and Hillary Clinton, because what they did was overcoming some challenges they shouldn't have been faced with to begin with. We don't think that that was completely fair. We think that that analogy simply states that they had so much difficulty becoming who they were, and that shouldn't be necessary. And yes, we believe that the process should be fair, but it really isn't, and that is the whole problem with their proposition case. And thank you. And I also said that it worsens barriers. For example, they gave us the idea that that simply women, we're going to think that women aren't good enough. We're going to think that if we give these quotas to women, that women are going to feel inferior to men, that women are going to feel as though they didn't really deserve the place that they got. But we say that this is really unfair, because in the first place, they are put in a disadvantage. This is why we're having this motion, because that they have an inherent disadvantage in society, and this is to be accommodated and not ignored by simply saying that they will be inferior if we help them out with the things that we, in a historical context, have done to them. Thank you. Now, before I go into my contentions, I'd like to say that our burden is not to show that all cases of affirmative action are useful anymore, but that it is useful in some cases, and that the feminist movement shouldn't oppose it entirely. So on to the first point that I have about harms of inequality. And the first point that I have to that is the problems in the status quo. Well, we see, for example, the expectations to women. We see that women are expected in many regards to stay at home. They have a certain gender role. They should stay at home. They should watch out for children. They have these caring things about them. But before I develop this point, yes.
Without quotas, 50% of college graduates are women. What makes you think that women are still being forced into traditional gender roles, especially in Western liberal democracies?
Well, we're not saying that women are in all cases forced into these gender roles, but it's not like it's a huge surprise that I'm saying that in many cases and in many regards, people see women and there is a social comment on them, like belonging in the kitchen and those kinds of things, and that they are meant to do certain things. And we think that these gender roles are still prevalent in today's society. Whereas we think that, for example, if you see movies and that kind of thing, like sports, we see that it is primarily dominated by men. If you see an action movie or something, it's not really the hero in that movie that is a woman. Well, this is most often because that we have this idea that men somehow are superior to women inherently, even though that women are equally capable of all those things. And thank you. We don't think that women have an inherent disadvantage, or that they are inherently incapable of doing those things. We think that it's because the general view upon women and the approach to the gender roles that they should be forced into, that we think that this is the case. And we don't think that it's fair because women are equally capable of doing all those things. And this is really important to stress that it's not really because they're inferior. And thank you. And on to the second topic that I have about why does inequality matter. Well, we see that when we remove the stereotypes of, for example, how women should be. We don't necessarily only remove the stereotypes of how women should be, because men are expected to act in certain ways as well. So if we remove the stereotype and the gender roles of how women are supposed to act in society, like they're supposed to stay at home, they're supposed to do all these things. Well, we also remove the fact that men should do all these things, men should go to work, men should be, the breadwinner and those kinds of things. Well, we think that women could do that as well, and the man should stay at home. We don't think that this is a problem. We think that people should be able to do the things that they want to do because they want to do them, not because the society tells them this is what you were born to do because you have a certain gender. It doesn't make any sense to us. No, thank you. And we also think that in the workplaces and those kinds of things, we should have people who are best suited for the job. We shouldn't have people just put there because of quotas or because of these things. We think there are other ways of affirmative action, and that's what I'm getting into in my second point now. Why affirmative action actually benefits. What is affirmative action really? No, thank you. We think that it's, as I said, compensation for disadvantages, and we know that women are inherently disadvantaged in society today because we have all these patriarchal views of how they shouldn't be working, they shouldn't be doing all these things, because this is some sort of idea that we have. And especially because, for example, we see also, and thank you, that it shouldn't be necessarily a hard thing to do or a hard thing to accommodate. In addition, we can give you the example of colleges reserving in America, reserving spots for African American people because that they had an inherent disadvantage at some point, no thank you, and then they were accommodated for that with affirmative action because they needed that boost, not because they were inferior. We don't think that black people are inferior to white people or in that sense, but because they were disadvantaged historically, which then makes sense and to pull this through. And also, we think that it works because you're directly counteracting something that is inherently wrong in society. So if you're directly counteracting the problem with, for example, women's inferiority, saying that there are different things. For example, I'd like to give you the example of traditional symphony orchestras where they actually previously had different interviews and those kind of things, where they would cast these people, but now they have medical tests and those kind of things, what are they actually capable of. And this has turned out to be showing that women actually do have a more prevalent field in those orchestras because that it's leveled the playing field for these people. And also that it works because, I'd like to give you another example. For example, forced paternity leave. Forced paternity leave means that women aren't necessarily inherently disadvantaged just because they're women in a workplace, for example. If they are given the opportunity to do to work instead of the man because the man now has the same forced thing upon him that he should stay home just because he has a child. So that because that we've told you that harms of inequality do exist, and because that affirmative action is needed, we're going to oppose.
certain opposition has been very vague on what affirmative action really is. They in fact suggested that affirmative action is a form of monetary compensation. Hang on, what does this mean? $10 for one sexist comments? $20 for two? They've never really proven how their model of affirmative action solves the problem in society, solves the problem of equal appreciation. Even if you were to concede that this is a proper metric, they haven't told us the specifics of this. Who's going to pay? How are they going to pay this? How are they going to enforce this mechanism to the point where it's going to solve the problems they claim they're going to solve? We tell them to be extremely vague about this, and because they don't have a proper solution to combat the problems that they try to forward, on this count alone, their side has lost this debate. They further lost the characterization of Western liberal democracies as democracies wherein rights are already equally respected, wherein how we already grant, for example, women to work, women to board buses, women to learn for parliament, women to learn for chancellors. This is characterization they've never taken down. They also haven't tackled any of my first speaker's logic. They also haven't tackled any of my first speaker's logic, which I'll be following later. My two main points of contention for today. Firstly, on the purpose of women, and does affirmative action really solve this problem, even if you were to take the vastly misconstrued notion of monetary compensation. So on to the first point, right, about the purpose of women. The first thing they told us was that there are certain expectations of women in a society, there are certain gender roles. Yes, we told you that there are certain specifics of gender roles. We tell you that, for example, on a very minor level, for example, more men are likely to go into engineering schools, but more female are likely to go into art schools and stuff like that. But the point of this motion is to find out which side better deals with these problems and ensures that we carry on equal appreciation, to which I quote that first speaker. Because if we are trying to strive forward for equal appreciation, this means that we need a solution that enables for equal appreciation even when we have these different gender roles, even when there are more men in engineering faculties, even when there are more female in arts faculties. Because we tell you that it's not sexism, it's not sexism, it's not, for example, a problem with the education system that this happens. Because females still join educational facilities, men still join art faculties. We don't think that this is really a problem on their side. Even if you were to take this as a problem, we told you that their side makes it far worse because it propagates insidious notions that females don't deserve it, and the only way to deserve it is if the government sets a quota. This was logic that came up in my first speaker, never once dealt for their side. We take it that they concede that affirmative action is very, very harmful to female. And by extension, it's harmful to the feminist movement because what the feminist movement is trying to do is ensure that females are not looked upon as inferior, to ensure that females are looked upon as to a certain degree equals. On that count, they feel the burden of Then they try to retreat to this very vague characterization of how the situation of women in Western liberal democracies is similar to that of blacks in 1960s America. Hang on, we don't think that women today are prohibited from getting onto the bus. We don't think that the women of today are short of participating in mass protests or participating in rallies. We tell that the problems they identify in the model are far different. Because in a Western liberal democracy, we tell you that certain rights are already upheld, certain rights are already accepted, and what we have to try and do is combat deep down ingrained societal perceptions. On this count alone, we tell them because they don't understand the nature of Western liberal democracies, because they don't understand the very problem they're trying to deal with in the very first place, and because even if they didn't, hold on a moment sir, the solution simply does not lead to any concrete benefits, but in fact leads to more harms, our side has already taken the debate at this point. Yes.
How will you otherwise fight the wrong societal perceptions we have of women in today's society?
So, our entire first speaker's speech was to tell you how an equity of opportunity, which means to allow for females to fairly enter the political workplace, to allow to enter the economic workplace, is a far better way of correcting social stereotypes. Because quite frankly, if you see a woman such as Margaret Thatcher work her way up the ladder on her own merit and facing the same problems as other male candidates have to face, this sends a far more positive message than just giving them a hard-tech quota and furthering this insidious notion of women as a gender that needs things given to them rather than being able to work towards it. We tell that if their side thinks that this is the case, then they're insulting the numerous women who have made it to the top of society and have succeeded by facing the same challenges that men have faced by doing this without affirmative action. So moving on to a substantive for today, right? About how we make the feminist, about how the feminist movement should not accept this so as to make the feminist movement less stagnant. The premise of my argument is that the feminist movement, while it has achieved a lot of things, still has problems to deal with in Western liberal democracies. This is because of a trend that my first speaker had identified, what third-wave feminism, while combating deeply ingrained social stereotypes and the way, for example, some men look at some women and vice versa. Why is this important, right? Because it is only through changing social perceptions that we are able to ensure the sort of equal society that both sides of this house gives in. What does this mean in a very concrete way? This means that if some women are better at something, and that if some men are viewed better at something else, both genders still view each other as equals, both genders still view each other as fair, even though they both achieve equal outcomes, even if they go into the different careers, even if they choose their own different paths in life. Because of this, right, we tell that the feminist movement should never remain stagnant, and the feminist movement should never accept policies which might lead to it to become stagnant, because there are certain things that still need to be corrected in spite of the massive progress made in Western liberal democracies. So what's the problem, right? Affirmative action sets a very tokenistic symbol of achieving equality, because by that metric, achieving a sort of a 50-50 ratio or ensuring that men pay $10 for a sexist comment is somehow enough to combat the deeply ingrained societal mindsets, it's enough to combat the deeply ingrained social stereotypes, which is where they might come up to us and tell us today that, hang on, quotas aren't really that good, to which I've already told you that quotas are the most common way of, for example, ensuring that some people get something, and etc. We tell that quotas are already used by nations which use affirmative action under the model. We tell that this point is a good point. But back to my substantive, right? We tell you, back to my substantive, right? With affirmative action, you're basically giving an easy way out. You're basically giving the feminist movement a cop-out to, for example, force women into male-dominated sectors of the industry and claim equality. Because females are in an engineering faculty, because females occupy a higher ratio in parliament than it would already have been so. Not only is this problematic, because this is tokenistic harm, but it also glosses over the need to systemically change certain mindset. It glosses over the problem of the need to change certain mindset, the need to change certain stereotypes. And this means that with the availability of a cop-out option, there will be a less effort to, for example, improve education. There will be a less effort, for example, to propagate campaigns to tackle insidious perceptions of female towards males and vice versa. We feel that this is very harmful, because if the feminist movement were to accept anything, it is to ensure that it in itself, the movement, is not harmed by whatever it accepts. And because of the fact that affirmative action glosses over the problems that feminism needs to solve, because of the fact that accepting affirmative action in fact glosses over the problems that the feminist movement as a whole needs to combat in the context of Western liberal democracies, we tell you that the feminist movement should never accept affirmative action in the context of Western liberal democracies.
Thank you very much to the Deputy Prime Minister, the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Thank you.
We have already accomplished so much in the field of women's rights ever since brave women of the past fought for suffrage in the early 1900s. Since then, women's movements have blossomed and grown established. Luckily enough, because of all of this past past pains, we see that in the modern world, we don't need to go to these extremes in order for the women's rights and wishes to be met. So what we see is that in today's world, the only thing we need are affirmative actions, and that is what side opposition stands proudly to propose in today's debate. So, before I get into my substantive case about why should it be done by the feminist movement, why they're the right actor, I'll get into some rebuttal and reconstruction. So first of all, what is the, I feel like I need to outline like what is the actual problem. I feel like both sides have had their view on what the actual problem is. What the actual problem is the perception of women. We believe that the perception is still off. The rights are equal. We agree with side proposition, no thank you, but we do not believe that the perception is equal. We still believe that men perceive women as some cases inferior. We still believe that in some fields, we still believe that there is a social value of that women are better in the homes, and we also believe that they have, no thank you, an inherent disadvantage of having to be pregnant at some point. So we believe that we want to level the field with affirmative actions. We believe that they need this. We do not believe that we're taking their merits away from them. We believe that we can give these merits to the women, give more opportunities for them to actually achieve these merits. So what have we heard from side proposition? We've heard three arguments basically about the same thing. We've heard about how these affirmative actions will cause stagnation in feminist movements. We've heard about how no one will believe the women that they have actually accomplished this. No one will believe that women can do anything if we help them do these things. So what we actually believe is that, as I've just mentioned, the problem is perception. We need to level the playing field. We need to make sure that the places where women actually do have, no thank you, an inherent disadvantage. For example, the example about paternity leave, we believe that we want to level the field. So for example, an affirmative action could be paternity leave. As my first speaker brought up, this is a great example. We see that when a company needs to hire someone, they could, for example, have two equal in skill and experience candidates, but what we see is that the one is a woman and the other one is a man. The woman has a higher risk of having to go on maternity leave at some point. They have to be pregnant. They have a higher risk of having to do their motherly duties. What we see is that, for example, by doing the affirmative action of making mandatory paternity leave, we see that these two will now be on equal footing again. We see that they will both be at the same level. We see that they will both be at the same kind of investment. So what we also saw is that they've been talking a lot about the quotas. We believe that quotas can be a good idea in some cases. Which still matches our burden of proving that affirmative action is okay, that it is okay in some cases. You do not need to prove that it is okay in all cases. And so quotas can still fight the errors of perception. For example, in some countries where like the perception problem can be really bad, there can be a need for quotas in high-ranking positions in like whatever. So also we asked them, no thank you, we asked them a PY in their second prop speech about how will you otherwise fight the inequalities. First of all, what's important to notice is that they conceded to the fact that there actually is some sort of inequality. Secondly, they said that we want to create, in a moment, we want to create equal opportunity for both sexes. That is what we want to as well. And before I substantiate at this point, yes please.
Exactly what type of quotas do you stand for that change perceptions in society?
We believe that we need to give the opportunity to women to actually show what they can do. Their merits needs to be shown at some point, and we believe that in some cases it is necessary to impose quotas in order for them to actually show what they need. So back to the point about we need to create equal opportunity. So what we see is that also in many cases in companies, in politics, it is a male-dominated social society. We see that a lot of it depends on who are you friends with, especially in politics. Who are you friends with? Who can you influence? Like the whole lobbying scene of it. And we believe that this is in many cases male-dominated. We believe that women have to have a chance to actually prove themselves and has to have a chance to get into these men's clubs and show what they can do so that they can actually get on the equal footing. Also, No, thank you. Also, this is in the nature of the motion, as opposed to side propositions' burden to prove that their burden was to prove that there were benefits to the feminist movement. We believe that it is in the nature of the motion to prove that there are benefits for women in general as well. So, or mainly. Also, we also believe that there can actually be tangible benefits to this. So the example brought up about the orchestras by my first speaker actually also has another dimension to it. So what we saw was that for orchestras in many places, it was almost solely male dominated. We saw we saw that as soon as they tried to instead of watching the players go in and play their music, no thank you, they only listened to the music itself, what they were playing, and suddenly we saw a drastic and significant increase in females in orchestras. This is mainly in the United States. So, moving into my constructive point about why should it be done by the feminist movement and why can they actually do something. So first of all, the feminist movement in general, all over the Western liberal world, has a strong footing. We see that they for example, in Canada, they have the Women's Affairs Office that looks at all government affairs and mainly with female interests. No, thank you. And then they have a possibility to object to certain statistics or whatever if they with female interest in mind. So there we already see that they have really strong footing in certain democracies. We also see that they have strong contacts. This leads, because they're an established movement, we see because they've been working since the early 1900s, we see that they have influential lobbying in many countries, and we also see that they have a good image for the public. If the public needs to digest these changes, if the men should not resent these women at some point, we believe that the feminist movement can actually prevent this. We believe that the good image they have of fighting for equality can actually make sure that men will not resent them. Also, because we're not overruling them, necessarily overruling them with quotas. Also, we believe that they are the right actor because they have the matching ideology. It justifies them as an actor that they also have the women's best interest in mind, and we believe that on all these accounts the feminist movement is the right actor and will actually be able to cause tangible benefits. So what have I told you here today? I've told you that side proposition case rests on one simple statement, that this will all cause a stagnation in the feminist movement. It rests on the fact that all of these quotas will make it so that nobody will believe in the merits of the women, if nobody will believe that they can actually do anything, and we have solidly proven to you that our affirmative actions are not necessarily this. It can be things like paternity leave that simply levels the playing field of perception of how good of an investment they are, and we believe that we, on all these grounds, have won the debate and are proud to oppose. Thank you.
And manifestation of affirmative action. We talked to you about quotas. This is in comparison to what they talked to you about, which was compensation for sexist comments, which was things like, for instance, putting female superheroes in movies. It was things like paternity leave, for instance. But never mind, let's see that now on their grounds, ladies and gentlemen. If they think that quotas are not okay, and therefore we should oppose it, that sounds like a point from our they were very vague about it. They said they support quotas that somehow manage to change perception of women. What are these specific quotas, ladies and gentlemen? They never give us any substantive analysis as to what these quotas are, just retreating to some vague euphemisms that their side has been following down the line. So let's talk about what they actually stood for. They stood for really one type of affirmative action. They stood for paternity leave. Ladies and gentlemen, let's offer a better alternative to paternity leave right here, right now. How about we have leave that both parents can take as and when they want? This is the model that the European Union currently follows, ladies and gentlemen, where there is a shared leave between the father and the mother. There is no need for affirmative action. We believe in gender equity, not forced equality. But then they try to characterize Western liberal democracies as not being able to forward female rights. Ladies and gentlemen, these liberal democracies are not Iran and they are not Saudi Arabia. This is not a fight to allow women to vote. This is not a fight to allow women to drive. This is a fight to change perceptions of people, and we do not need affirmative action to ensure that women go to school or go to medical school, for instance, because these problems have already been solved in status quo with organic change. That's why the debating context here today is Western liberal democracies and not developing nations. So second contention on what was the feminist movement. Right down the line, they told you one baseline. The feminist movement stood for equality of opportunity and not equality of outcome. Their side stood for equality of outcome, where just because you had a quarter of people, and just because there were an equal number of males and women in politics, for instance, everything would be solved. No, the feminist movement never stood for equality of outcome because they stood for removing the barriers between men and women. Because they recognized that if there were still artificial barriers between a man and a woman, then the feminist movement itself has failed, ladies and gentlemen. Because it shows that there is still some sort of distinction between when you are born, whether you are a man or a woman. Instead, the feminist movement tries to remove these barriers altogether, ladies and gentlemen. And when you have affirmative action, what happens is that you assign a certain portion of seats, for instance, in parliament to women, which indicates that there's some sort of differentiating factor between men and women. This is the artificial barrier that it imposes, and that's why the feminist movement should never support it. But then they talk to us about existing stereotypes in society. So let's do the comparative here. The way they wanted to solve existing stereotypes in society was to have 50% of engineers be women, 50% of artists be women, 50% of bus drivers be women, ladies and gentlemen. That's not the way to solve stereotypes in society. Instead, they're just pushing the societal perception under the rug without doing anything to lead to concrete change, ladies and gentlemen. Stereotypes in society exist because of things like perception, because of perception that women are inferior to men. What happens when you have affirmative action, and the only reason why there's 50% of women in parliament is because of affirmative action? Doesn't this breed the mentality that women are inferior to men, that they need these quotas in order to enter parliament in the first place? They are the side that forwards these stereotypes in society to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we argue that their side is the side that's going to extremes. They told us that their side is the side that doesn't go to extremes, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, but affirmative action is an extreme measure. It's forcing companies, forcing parliaments to accept an equal number of men and women, ladies and gentlemen. If this isn't extreme, I don't know what is.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
We simply want women to be able to choose what they want to do. We basically believe that we want to fight the perception of the women, and yeah, what is your response?
Okay. They want women to be able to choose what they want to do. That sounds like the world that we are living in right now, Western liberal democracy. If a woman wants to go into parliament right now and she has a strong interest in politics, she can, and she will have no tougher a time than if she were a man. That is the reason why you have Western liberal democracies to begin with, and that's why Western liberal democracies have moved feminism into third wave feminism, ladies and gentlemen. If a woman wants to become an engineer, there is no higher barrier to entry on either side of the house. But then they talk to us about paying off blacks and how paying off blacks was affirmative action. Ladies and gentlemen, we argue that there's a systemic difference between paying off blacks in the 1960s and the world we live in today. In the 1960s, blacks were heavily discriminated against. They were treated the same way women are treated now in developing countries, ladies and gentlemen. And if we don't have to say that we should have affirmative action in these circumstances, ladies and gentlemen. But we're talking about Western liberal democracies here, where we have moved beyond developing countries. We've moved beyond just trying to give women some sort of status in society. We've moved beyond that, ladies and gentlemen. And therefore, this is not analogous to the analogy of blacks in the 1960s is not analogous to women today. But let me talk to us about how, well, currently there's some sort of disjunct in society, ladies and gentlemen. Because women get pregnant. And because women get pregnant, they therefore can't, they somehow or rather are disadvantaged in society. Let's tell you the solution to this, ladies and gentlemen. The solution to this is to ensure, ladies and gentlemen, that we ultimately, if you have to go through paternity leave, it can be taken by either sex. We give you this solution already. We argue it's a better solution on our side than on their side. But then they talk to us about how politics is male-dominated. And how, because it's male-dominated, ultimately it means that we need to push women up. And I'm filling in the gaps for them here, right? They talk to us about how politics are male-dominated. But we reject this analysis. If you look at organic change in America over the last 50 or the last 20 years, the number of women in parliament has quintupled without the need for affirmative action, ladies and gentlemen. This means that there is organic change in society today. What happens on their side is that they regress this organic change because now the women who are already in parliament are seen as getting into parliament because of affirmative action and not because of their own merit. This regresses organic change. It puts us back in a society where men and women are different. And this is where we are wary of quotas sets in ingrained societal perception. Their last argument was that some feminist movements are influential. Precisely, ladies and gentlemen, these groups are influential because they fought for equity and not equality. We have to be very careful here, because if these women start fighting for affirmative action and they started fighting for equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity, they are seen as extreme, ladies and gentlemen. That's where they lose all the support that their side says that these groups have. That's where they lose the support and make them influential to begin with. To keep this influence, we must stand for equality of opportunity and not equality of outcome. That's why we stand on the side of women. That's why we stand on proposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, side proposition hasn't made this debate any clearer by putting words into our mouth about what we're proposing. When we talked about what our definition of affirmative action was and how we thought it was broader than the narrow description which they were giving, and that it was more than quotas, by saying that we were going to compensate for something, they essentially took this to be monetary compensation. So we think that they've also been down the bench basically just saying that we're proposing things and that we're agreeing with things which we simply haven't said. But before I go on into explaining why we think that our side of the motion still comes out on top, I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to introduce to you my three main clashes in this debate. First of all, what is the need in this motion? Secondly, what would affirmative action do? Thirdly, what would they on side proposition have us do? So let's get right in. What is the need? We on side proposition in our first speech came up and told you that we think that the need is, as they have to a very large extent agreed with us, that there are different ideas about women that are perpetuated within society. We have never, as my second speaker pointed out, never ever said that women don't have equal rights in terms of voting or ability to move around. But we don't think that means that they have complete, we don't think that means that they have complete freedom to do what they want, because opportunities are not always open to them. No, thank you. We think that
that there's a distinction between positive and negative freedoms, and we don't think that we think that the problems of having opportunities available to you as a man, which are not as a woman, are issues which need to be taken seriously, which need to be dealt with by feminism. No, thank you. We think that we need to deal with these, and we think that affirmative action is a way of dealing with this. Has ways of dealing with this in a couple of ways. But like, first of all, I just want to emphasize that we can agree that the need is that we need to deal with these perceptions which people have of women in different environments, in different roles, and that is what we're going to talk about in terms of what would affirmative action do, and what would they have us do under their model, or under their motion, or under their model, what they propose. Okay, so what would affirmative action do? We have basically said that affirmative action is just a broad concept about trying to compensate and right the wrongs which are there because of things intrinsic in our society, which we want to change. Things such as the fact that blacks have been in the United States have been disadvantaged, and that they can face discrimination even today. Things like the fact that women have typically been seen as fulfilling feminine roles, such as housewives and different things like that, and that still affects the perception of them today. But what would affirmative action do for them? Well, it depends on the type of affirmative action, no thank you, which we're talking about. So let's look at a couple types. Let's look at, for example, the things which they have talked about the very most, quotas. Okay, so what would quotas do? We don't think that the feminist movement should advocate for quotas in every single circumstance across the whole world. That's why we think that their points about whether or not there's equality in terms of number of students in different universities or not is not necessarily relevant, because it depends on if there is a discrepancy or not. We're not advocating for a one-size-fits-all situation. What we're saying is that the feminist movement needs to be able to accept that affirmative action can do things if in some circumstances which are helpful. But what would affirmative action actually do? The whole point of quotas is basically to get women in the door. Once women are in the door, there's enough of them that people can, enough of them getting hired or in these positions, no thank you, that they can be seen, that they can show off what their actual abilities are. That is when we think that we break down these stereotypes about women. That is when we think that we break down gender roles. That is when we think that we show that women are, in many cases, are in pretty much every single case, just as capable as men. And that is why in some cases, although not all, when there is a lack of women in the door because of because of this entrenched kind of subversive notion that women aren't as capable, when we can fight that by allowing women to prove themselves once they're actually in the door, which they have pretty much dismissed, no thank you, in terms of the actual amount of effort that Hillary and that Thatcher had to go through to get that far. We think that once they get that far, then they can themselves break down these gender models. But we think that they need to get there in the first place, and we think that quotas are, for example, one way of dealing with it, but not a one-size-fits-all policy. Okay, let's look at another example. No thank you. Let's look at another example. Let's look at the thing which we believe is a very, very good example across most of the Western world which could work: forced paternity leave. My second speaker told you essentially that, okay, when we have a, we told you this example of if you were an employer and you have two equal participants, you have two equal, no thanks, that you have two equal applicants for the same job. And basically you need to make a decision. How do you make the decision? Under the status quo, it is simply a fact that women take longer maternity leave than fathers take paternity leave. That means that essentially, if you are an employer, you are looking to get the most value out of what you pay in terms of salary to these people, and that means that you have an incentive to hire the man instead of the woman. We think that we don't want this to be the case. What we want to be the case is that we want equal people who do the same job just as well to have an equal chance of getting hired. And we think that if we force parents to take paternity leave, that is, for example, one way in which we can break down another gender role, which is that of how fathers don't have to play as much a role in the household. We think that by breaking down these gender roles and showing that, one, women don't necessarily have to take as long off as society expects them to, and two, that men can take more off than society currently expects them to, then we can break down these gender roles and ultimately encourage more gender equality throughout society. We've also told you an example of the orchestra thing, which let me just briefly get one extra layer of analysis. Basically, unfortunately, thankfully for these orchestras, there is a method possible for them to actually hire women without having to look at them and without having this insidious notion of whether they're a woman or not factoring in. But this is simply not the case in most jobs. This is simply not the case amongst most opportunities for women. I'll take you in a second. And because we don't have such an easy fixed solution for a lot of places, we need to allow women to get in the first place to break down stereotypes. Yes.
If a woman makes it through the door through affirmative action and then fails to do a good job, doesn't that mean that men would think that women are inferior to men?
Not necessarily, because we think that men who get hired and do just as bad a job will also help break down the stereotype. We also think that if we have a quota which brings in enough women, and then we think that even if 1 or 2 women don't do as good a job as they maybe should, then we think that the other women will demonstrate that this is not the case. In fact, that in fact women, just like men, sometimes are very good at their job and are sometimes bad at their job, which we think is absolutely true. Okay, now perhaps another very important clash in this debate. What would they have us do? This is a very important question to answer, ladies and gentlemen. They have essentially advocated that you have that we have like these organic initiatives, like as they prefer to call them, where basically you have different campaigns and where people work their way into these positions and get and have opportunities to demonstrate that they themselves are capable of doing things despite whatever is entrenched already. But we told you, ladies and gentlemen, that this is not always the case in all circumstances. Sometimes the barriers for getting in are simply too high, and we need to break them down and let women in before these kind of things can happen. And we think that even if there are a lot of places in Western society in which women can get in without having an extreme barrier put up in front of them, we think that because of the fact that they still do in a number of cases, such as science and engineering colleges, where we're not advocating for 50%, as they might have told you, but where we're advocating to have more women get involved and to prove themselves, we think that we're basically telling you that if there are situations in the Western world, as we think we've shown you, where women are disadvantaged in terms of getting in, then we think, or have other disadvantages because of the entrenched notions of society, then we think that it's definitely legitimate for feminist movements to support these, and we don't think that they should be opposed to them, because we think that although although not everything needs a quota, not every problem is going to be fixed by this, some things will, and feminists need to keep their options open, and be able to be reasonable about what the best way forward is. So, what have I told you today? I've told you how we agree that the need is that instead of fighting for actual for formal rights, what we're trying to fight for is the equality of opportunity. And I've also shown you how affirmative action helps break down these barriers, which are so important in making certain that gender roles are not as entrenched as they already are. And I've shown you how their model offers none of those benefits, no unique benefits, but it simply leaves feminists with less options on the table. And it's for this reason that I ask you to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'd like to have the opposition in class. Thank you.
Is there genuinely a need? What do we do with this need, if it is there? And will this benefit women in the end? These are the 3 questions that I'll be analyzing this debate throughout in my reply speech. So, first of all, is there actually a need? What we heard from side proposition is that we live in Western liberal democracies. We heard that women don't lack any rights, they can go on the buses, so we don't have any need. What we said on side opposition is that there is a mistake in the perception of women. We see that there is still an issue of workplaces hiring more men. We cannot identify exactly what the wrong perception is, but we can see the results are clear. More men are being hired. We saw the result of the orchestras, where as soon as the site was taken out of it, as soon as they couldn't see whether it was a man or a woman, a lot more women were immediately hired. So we have definitely proven that there is a problem of perception. Also, we see that they do have one biological inherent disadvantage when it comes to companies. They have their pregnancy, and they have and therefore they have their maternity. We do agree that right as of now there is equal leave, but we do feel like more often than not it is the women's role, because of the society perception, to actually take up this leave and actually take up the role of being the dominant parent. So they do have an inherent disadvantages. So we believe that there is definitely a need for affirmative actions. So what do we actually do about this? What has the two sides said about this? The side proposition has said, well, we don't need to do anything about it, because if we do anything about it, then nobody will believe that the women can actually do anything, because if we help them in any way, if we help anyone in any way, nobody believes that they can do anything by themselves. What we believe is that we have seen throughout history that sometimes people need help in order for them to gain a strong footing in society. So we believe that our burden is, or our idea of getting them inside the door with affirmative action is what is needed, and is not something that will make us disbelieve that they can actually do anything. It is an opportunity for them to prove that they can. So, will this actually benefit women? What we heard from side proposition was that nobody would believe the accomplishment, and there are many risks involved if they fail. So, like if a woman has gotten hired on the merit of an affirmative action, then if they suddenly fail, then everybody would immediately think women are horrible. We see that this is the same between men and women, that if you fail, you are horrible, not your gender. We do not believe that people will simply like assume because one woman could not do her job well, that the whole entire gender is horrible at doing this job. What we believe is that we need them to prove themselves, because as of now there is the perception that nobody can do it. We need to prove that some of them actually can, as it is with men. So what we saw from side opposition is that women need to prove themselves. They can. We need to fight for equal opportunity. We need to fight because we need equal opportunity, because we need women to be able to decide on the same level as men. As of now, we see that everybody has a freedom of choice, but there are still, women do still have restrictions. They have restrictions in the way that some jobs, they might be able to choose to apply for them, but that doesn't matter if they will never get it. So what we believe is that we need to give them all equal opportunities. We need to get them on the same footing as men. We need the playing field to be level. We need it to be equal. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.